Hi, my name is Tara M. Clapper, T-A-R-A-M as in Marie, Clapper, C-L-A-P-P-E-R, and I authorize LARP House to use this video and my likeness in all of their presentations and marketing materials. I'm going to be speaking about a few LARPs I'll mention during my interview. My LARP is Chariot LARP, C-H-A-R-I-O-T LARP. I'm also working on Intrigue and Independence. It's I-N-T-R-I-G-U-E ampersand Independence, I-N-D-E-P-E-N-D-N-C-E. I'll also mention Seventh Kingdom, I-G-E, S-E-V-E-N-T-H, K-I-N-G-D-O-M, I-G-E. The I-G-E is in all caps. So those are the main ones I'll be talking about that I've kind of had a part in designing. I'll also probably mention Immerton, I-M-M-E-R-T-O-N. And with that, I'll go ahead and get started with the game designer interview. Hello, my name is Tara M. Clapper, and I am a full-time LARP designer with the Geek Initiative. And this was a recent career move I made after being laid off from a full-time work-at-home position where I was doing some public speaking and editing in the marketing field. And over time, I had realized that storytelling is what I'm in love with doing. And even as a marketer, what I was doing was telling stories about brands. So I was using all these skills that I had learned through live-action role-playing games and writing stories ever since I was a child to help people build their brands, when what I really wanted to do was be designing games. So once that job fell through, I had another offer, and the contract I got was a little weird. Ran it past a lawyer. Lawyer was like, yeah, they're trying to kind of take all your content here, let's change a little language, and long story short, the contract fell through because they wanted me to sign over all of my IP, including all of the LARPs that I had in production. So I didn't sign it and was like, okay, I guess in addition to the editing work that I do, I am now a LARP designer. And then I founded a game called Chariot LARP, and Chariot is an online digital immersive sci-fi game. So the players and the characters both talk to each other through video conferencing, and that's how it's online, but still a LARP. And the premise of the game is that you're going to be going on a spaceship, on a generational ship called Chariot, and you are meeting for the first time some of the people that you're going to be spending the rest of your life with aboard the ship. And the game actually takes place on Earth, and Earth is war-torn, disaster is imminent, and you're kind of like the last hope for civilization. And so you work with all these other crew members to kind of figure out your place in the world and in the beyond, and what it means to live and die aboard this ship as you get ready to go aboard. So that's the premise of Chariot LARP. I made it for a couple reasons. I wanted something accessible. I wanted something I could launch right away without sinking thousands and thousands of dollars into game development, because I don't have thousands and thousands of dollars. And I wanted something that, beyond being accessible, is also inclusive. So my game design itself is hopefully as inclusive as it can possibly be. If you have a disability, it's pretty easy to access. So that said, I'm going to be talking a little bit more about that, but also answering all these game designer interview questions. So, what is my job on staff? So at Chariot LARP, I am the game designer, and then I'm also the captain. So since this is a digital LARP, it's kind of different than some of the stuff you might normally see, or the job duties are a little different. So I have some admin tasks. I have some, I'd say, practical tasks. And then there's the design stuff, which is continually evolving with each run of the game. So in terms of design, first I created the entire design document, a safety and inclusion policy and consent, and then went ahead and made a whole workbook for the characters to fill out, did some alpha testing, and also made different scenarios and news items because I've hired other GMs to help run this game as well. So there was like this big design phase. I'm in charge of all the social media marketing and promotion for this game, so that's a whole job in itself. And then in the game itself, I usually play the captain. The captain is like our word for the GM, because that person is the captain on the ship. And for most of the runs, I'm the captain. We also have a closed run, and we have a run that's entirely filled with LARPers of color. So those two runs are going to be run by other people. And then all of the general runs, as well as the woman-only run, is going to be run by me. So I have an in and out of game job there. And I also do some customer servicey tasks and ticket fulfillment tasks and refund requests and stuff like that, which honestly, the business side of running a LARP is the hardest thing for me. Writing and executing a LARP, piece of cake compared to everything else. But then again, I have more experience doing that kind of stuff. So what style and genre is my LARP? Well, it is sci-fi, as I said, and it is all online, so it's digital. And it's more, I guess, like Nordic or Nord American style. It's a very rules-light game and focuses a lot on character development, on yes and methods, and on emotional safety. So those are kind of the hallmarks of the game. What is the most important thing to keep in mind while writing rules? Safety, the player being more important than the game, consent, accessibility, things like that are pretty important to me. So actually, my game is not rules heavy at all, except for the safety and consent rules. And we go over the safety and consent rules at the top of every single session because it's important to have that. I also do debrief sessions where we ask a couple questions and at least informally chat about how the game made us feel and whether there's any kind of lingering bleed or transfer of feelings from character to player or player to character. Do I base rules off of an existing system or do I completely write on my own? I think I'm influenced by a lot of different games that I've taken part in over the years. Probably more influenced by my recent interactions in some other games and game styles. I actually don't think I've played too much sci-fi LARP. I did play Oblivion, which kind of went into sci-fi. I played like a couple mods, or just kind of modules, just like short adventures at a convention before. But overall, I haven't really played in sci-fi. But I'm most influenced probably by New World Magiscola and the rules light system that they use. And I'm also influenced by Seventh Kingdom IGE, which I was a founding staff member at that game. It's a rules-heavy fantasy game, but a lot of the interactions that I had there, both positive and negative, have influenced my writing style. And also, like there were a lot of shortcuts that they developed that were really kind of essential to the way that different modules were prepared. And I think that's something that we miss in a lot of blockbuster LARPs, is that you can take a system and you can interchange different aspects. So I've written Chariot LARP, but I could reskin that as a fantasy LARP, and you probably will see me run a digital LARP in a fantasy universe. So you can easily just kind of retool that. I have written another LARP. It's only a 4-hour LARP called She's Got a Gun, whereas Chariot LARP is a campaign game. It's played over 12 hours over the computer. She's Got a Gun was meant to be a salon LARP, a convention LARP, and in She's Got a Gun, I have a feminist game design, and that system is also kind of interchangeable. So the players don't know what they're playing when they get there. There's no precasting. They choose the scenario. So I have a bunch of different empowering scenarios that they pick from. They're all survival situations, and the idea in She's Got a Gun is that one woman holds the gun, and nobody knows who it is or that she has the gun, and that in the course of the game, she can use that, or not, to kind of empower herself in the situation or someone else. So that can be kind of like reskinned as I go. So I guess that's something that I do. I'm sure other people have done that here and there. They've, kind of reframed the rules. But I'm really big on doing that, just to make it easier on myself. I've seen people do that a lot with character creation process, right? If you have a good character creation process and you switch genres, why limit yourself? As far as what style of rules I use, heavy or light, I prefer light rules. 2 years ago, I would never see myself saying this. The only rules I really like to have are a couple rules about the setting, consent rules, safety rules, and just some guidelines for inclusion. Other than that, I love creating a universe and just letting people play in it. With Chariot LARP, the players are actually developing the canon lore as we go. So I don't give them a huge lore document. I give them the basics, and they help develop it as they go, which is really fun. So what do I dislike and like about them? When you have a lot of rules, it's easier to sort of walk out and know what you're all about. If you don't, it's hard to do that unless you have a lot of workshopping before. So I'd say that's one way that rules-heavy games have an advantage. As far as rules-light games, you can actually focus a little bit more on the character development, or it's a little bit easier in most systems to take your character in a different direction than you might have otherwise. So, and it just allows the players more freedom, more agency, and it allows that for the characters as well. If I could change anything about the rules, what would it be? Well, for Chariot, it's really, really rules light. And the only thing I would have done earlier is tease certain things that I have coming up. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later probably. But, I was really open-minded about some topics. And that's led to some good things and some bad things. So I wouldn't have added more rules. I might have added more lore. And the other thing that I would have done sooner is create a Discord server and allow my players to communicate over Discord well before the first session began. They needed that communication beforehand, and I didn't see that, so they didn't get it. What type of rule system would you want to play in, and why? Again, rules light, the better. What approach do you take to writing combat or magic mechanics? In Chariot LARP, there really isn't any kind of combat or magic. There's no mechanics to talking to people. It's just what you're able to do with the confines of your situation. In She's Got a Gun, the interactions and the mechanics of the interactions are really dependent on who has the gun. And what happens is up to the other player or the NPC. So if the character who has a gun, points the fake gun and shoots, then, like if they shot at me, I as the NPC would decide whether or not I'm taking it. The other rules thing that I do is, especially in Chariot LARP, I don't really have NPCs. I have scripted PCs. And I'm also writing a blockbuster game called Intrigue and Independence about the American Revolution. And again, no NPCs, it's scripted PCs. And what that means is instead of having non-player characters, every player character has a lot of agency. They do have mandatory objectives they must complete, whereas the other PCs can do whatever they want. They just get suggested objectives to complete. Scripted PCs have mandatory objectives to push forward the plot of the game. So that's something I do that is a little different than a lot of other games. Conversely, I've seen some other games like New World Magiscola, while there's a lot, while they don't really use scripted PCs, it's really customizable in that when you're PCing at that game, you can request an NPC. So the thing that I'm not doing that I do really like is this whole request an NPC thing, because that makes it super personal to the players and the characters. So that's something that I might explore in future LARPs, but I'm not doing for Intrigue and I'm not doing for Chariot. What approach do I take to writing social mechanics? I let the players do what they can do. If I played in a game where there was a diplomacy mechanic. I've played in a couple games that had diplomacy mechanics. And I usually play a pretty good diplomat, pretty good bard. And I gotta say, social mechanics, I felt weird buying diplomacy, and I never used it because I just was diplomatic. I just role-played it, and the other people were good role-players, and that's kind of all we needed to do. So I feel like a lot of times social mechanics are overdone. And it's kind of weird because it's like in a bot for combat game, you can hit someone, and if your real life ability doesn't work, sometimes there's another ability or there's an ability to enhance it. So I guess they want to kind of balance that out by putting in social mechanics too. So I get why it's there, but I'd rather just have an overall rules light system. What do you hope to accomplish for the player experience with your rules system? I hope people feel free to kind of use their imaginations and play their characters they want and to develop as they want. Because, and again, 2 years ago me wouldn't have said this, but no rules are so liberating, right? I used to like to have rules because it could kind of give you a path. But now I enjoy not having very many rules because the players can decide what they want to do. As a GM, as a game designer, it kind of like, it's sort of like free. It's like sending your kid to college, I think, right? Like, you've developed this thing, and then you send your system out to college. And you send your kid out to college, and then they determine what they're going to be. Similarly, with a game, you put it in the hands of your players, and you leave it to them to tell this beautiful collaborative story. And so there's a lot of trust that has to happen between the designer and the player to make that happen. And I'm fine with that. Like, once you write the system, once you write the game, it's not really in your hands where it ends up. It's in their hands. And once you can kind of realize that and play into that, then you're not going to like railroad your players into one thing or the other. With intrigue and independence, we know what happened in real life with the American Revolution, but we don't know what's going to happen in the game. We don't know which side's going to be more persuasive or tougher, right? So, or more charming. So we need to, I need to just kind of let that go as both a game designer and as somebody who went to the same prep school as George Washington's adopted son. I need to let that go and be like, there's a chance that these PCs are going to be like, go Britain, right? I need to let that be in their hands. And I'm okay with that. With Chariot, I made it so freeform that it's a lot easier to do. And there are multiple runs. So every run is a different ship. And there's some cool surprises I've written into the lore that people haven't figured out yet. But overall, like, they make the story. So how do you start to create your world? It depends on the setting. Sometimes I actually design for whatever space I have available. So, I didn't start with a Kickstarter. I don't have any capital to invest. Chariot LARP was no different. The setting I had was the computer. That's all I had. That's the only space I have available. I have my apartment, which can maybe comfortably hold 10 people. 10 people does not an impressive LARP make. Okay, so I started with the space I could get, and that was digital. With intrigue and independence, I have always lived, for most of my life, I've been raised and I live near Philadelphia, and there are lots of places where this could be set, so I felt pretty comfortable not designing for a specific, like a specific house or a specific venue, but I did want to, a certain era and a certain location, which is around here. So hopefully I'll secure a really cool location around here. So I create worlds around what locations are available, which is very practical. Originally, Chariot LARP was going to be the blockbuster, and Intrigue was going to be a salon LARP. Now I have She's Got a Gun, which is a salon LARP, which the PDF is being finalized and should be ready to purchase soon. Chariot LARP is a digital game, and Intrigue is going to be the blockbuster. So a lot of them have changed forms over the past 2 years. And I started designing a couple years ago, and it only became a significant part of my time and income since. So where do I draw my story ideas from? Whatever is interesting me at the time, whatever media I'm consuming, and it's actually made me very aware of what media I'm consuming because that impacts what I'm creating. So I've been trying to read indie comics. The Wicked and the Divine has been like super inspirational to me. For the sci-fi stuff, Ascension, Firefly have both been pretty inspirational because it's about the crew. It's not, the ship is only one part of it, even when the ship is its own character. So, so those things have been really influential. Star Trek has been really influential. And the other LARPs that I've played, which I've mentioned, have also been really influential. How do I maintain my world history? So for Chariot LARP, because Chariot LARP is the only one that's really a campaign game out of the three things that I'm working on, I have a canon lore document. and players are welcome to add things in as suggestions. So the players collaboratively build the world history. Now, there are some things in there that are listed but locked. So if you look on my Chariot lore document, you'll see aliens locked. That means nobody else is allowed to add anything in, because that is hopefully going to be some kind of like Kickstarter bonus that I throw in there. So if you want to see an alien, that can happen, but we have to reach a certain goal for that to happen. What resources have been useful to you in building your world? Well, for Chariot LARP, I've just needed the computer. Actually, like solitude and thinking about being alone, and grief. These feelings are my resources. With She's Got a Gun, it was inspiration that happened while I was at one of the double exposure events. I wrote that LARP at like 3 in the morning, or the idea I wrote down at like 3 in the morning. And for intrigue, I would say just having grown up around here. I mean, when I was little, I would read nonfiction books about the American Revolution in bed, and I've been so fascinated by it. And Turn is such a fascinating show. And also, the way the country's gone recently, it's really caused me and many other Americans to think about the original intentions of the founders and the problematic nature of the founders. So I'd like to say that Intrigue and Independence is shaping up to be a mix of Turn and Hamilton, in that I'm trying to make the game as inclusive as possible in design, and I'm trying to examine spycraft and its role in the foundation of our country. So, it's definitely a lot that kind of goes into it. That LARP has required more research than any of the other ones. What factors contribute to world-changing events, plot-driven or player-driven? All player-driven. I throw some stuff in there for Chariot. I toss in some news items, so they get like a news briefing, and I leave them in a folder for my GM, so they can pick out or alter any news briefing that they want to kind of make that story unique. What's the most important thing to keep in mind while writing plot story? Don't. Chariot LARP turned out to be way more freeform than I had originally anticipated, and I'm very happy about that. That's actually like my favorite surprise of running this game. Work on giving your players safety and some structure. Don't really work on giving them too much plot. Give them a little bit of lore to work with. You'll identify your stronger role players, lean on them a little bit, let them know that it's okay to build and to be really collaborative and to lead the other players, and you're going to be fine. Again, design and writing is like the easy part of running a LARP and having a LARP business. The business side, at least for me, is the hard part. That can be different depending on you and your background and your experiences. So, relatively easy for me to market since I have a marketing background. Easy for me to write and execute. Very difficult for me to run the whole business. That's like been my biggest challenge. And as far as managing the personal plot lines, I try to engage each player. Chariot LARP has a limited number of people. It's only as many players as can fit on a Google Hangout, which is 10, including the person running it. So, in terms of managing personal plot, it's really easy to keep track of. It's really easy to kind of involve everyone and ask them specific questions as the captain, and that really helps. And then everybody who plays Chariot gets the opportunity to have a legacy. They can create art that goes in the repository. They can add to the master lore document, and giving them a legacy, I think at the end, helps them as players and characters have some closure. What do you do to ensure that each player feels their character is useful or valued? That's also a good question. I create the characters with them for Chariot LARP. It's a one-on-one consultation, and that is something that I got directly from Dragon Thrones. I also GM for the game theater, and had a blast GMing for Dragon Thrones 1. And they do one-on-one consultations with people before the characters are written. And that's something really personal. And I brought that into Chariot LARP. I would like to bring that to Intrigue. 80 plus people, it's a lot. And I'm also on the design team for Mari Brown's Imerton, and she's with Learn LARP. They run New World Magiscola. She's just such a brilliant creative person, and she invited me on the design team for Imerton, her all-woman LARP, and that's something I brought over because with a small group you can do that. You can have that personal character creation. And especially with those characters, because we're playing close to the heart, exploring themes that really impact us as people. Some of us are looking for that intentional bleed. I think that personalized character creation, that extra step there is really important. So that's another thing I do to kind of like incorporate them. How does writing for LARP differ from other types of story writing? It's collaborative. Even the game plotting process is way more collaborative than I initially thought. I create a semblance of a world. They build the world. That's kind of how I look at it. Like, I give them, I want to say it's like more structured than a sandbox, but I give them like a sandbox with a couple buildings in it, right? Buildings that are important to me as a designer. They can play with it. They can knock them down. They can create more stuff. I think making the world building collaborative is something that a lot of LARP designers are afraid to do, but should consider doing. And it is the number one positive thing I've learned after running Chariot LARP through one session. So we're going to move on to some production and organization questions. Can you describe your first experience staffing a LARP? Yes. My first experience staffing a LARP was at 7th Kingdom IGE in New Jersey. They're still around, still running. Definitely check them out. I was the marketing director, so the majority of my duties at that game were out-of-game things, right? I knew what I was doing in terms of grabbing new players. I had zero marketing budget, but I was learning search engine optimization, and I knew the power of blogging and networking, and I used that power to bring people into the game. I even found a LARPer on Free Cycle, my friend Nate, who has since played at many other games that I've also been a part of, and who has been convinced to come to other games that I am part of. So, my first experience staffing LARP was at 7th Kingdom. I've done everything there from do dishes all weekend. That sucked. To singing in the tavern as the primary entertainer. To writing modules and leading them. To eventually becoming a PC and taking my NPC character PC side. So I did a lot of different things there. But my primary job was actually out of game. So in game, there was a long time where it was like, well, what do they do with me, right? Like, am I just an NPC? Whatever. And that was kind of like an interesting thing, because you will have staff members that maybe are really good at an out-of-game duty, and you're like, what are they good at in-game? Or vice versa. They want to help out a game, and they're good at carrying a main role in-game. So it kind of took me a while to find my footing there. And once I did, I think I was better at writing small modules in a rules-heavy setting and really becoming close to the PCs. It was said that I wasn't good at leading a lot of people. I was really good at holding the attention of like 6 or 7 PCs, but not the attention of like the 30 to 80 that we had. So that was always a challenge for me too. And that certainly contributed to my imposter syndrome as I've moved along now writing a game, Intrigue and Independence, for 80 people. But, I really think having moved into a freeform setting, that it's not the burden of one NPC or one GM to entertain 80 people. It's giving people the freedom to do what they want to do in the world. And then PCs really can truly develop their own plot. And that's kind of been a big help there. How would I describe my LARP production? Digital. Right now I describe it as like kind of Serenity, like duct taped together with some spare parts. Like my computer's really crappy, and sometimes I have sound issues and all this stuff, but people are investing in me and in my idea and what I'm doing. And I have to believe that they're doing that for a reason. So that's Chariot LARP for you, right? I am partnering, hopefully, with some other more experienced professionals to do a blockbuster LARP. So Intrigue will hopefully be done that way. How many people are on your core team? What are their responsibilities? For Chariot LARP, I have myself. I do the design documents, and I'm running most of the runs. I have Josh, who's helping me with marketing, and hopefully will be helping me with some crowdfunding stuff. He also runs games. I have Morgan, who's also another GM. I have Jen, who helps tremendously with all the financial stuff and the customer service stuff that I'm not good at doing. Thank you, Jen. I have Michelle, who kind of keeps me on track. And, and then I also have my friend Nick, and he helps me manage the Discord server because he's like a Discord pro. We have a lot of moving parts at Chariot. I have to have like 5 or 6 programs open to stream it because that's the other component of Chariot. It's streamed for most runs. So he keeps the Discord server running. And right now, most of those people aren't paid. My 2 GMs are getting paid. The other ones, I'm like still figuring it out and repricing and trying to figure out numbers for a Kickstarter and if it's really solvent and if it's really sustainable. Would you explain the production of a single event game from start to finish? So for Chariot, it's a multi-session game. So players come on, first they do character creation with me, where we talk about what they want in a character, and then I create their character. Then they do a safety workshop, where we talk about safety rules, emotional safety, physical safety, that kind of stuff, as well as communication and inclusion. And then we begin the game. And as the captain, I lead it and give them like a news briefing. And that's kind of like how it goes. And then there's a debriefing after the session. And then we go all the way through. And then we have an in-game Ask Me Anything where people can come on and ask the characters things. So that is a super important thing. What are some of the most important aspects of a successful game production? I would say whether people felt included. That's the kind of engagement you're looking for. And post-game surveys are really important in figuring out whether everybody did feel included. I think that's like a big mark of success. Did they feel included? Did they feel what they were hoping to feel? Did they get out of it whatever it is they wanted to take away or leave behind? What are some production nightmares you've run into and how did you handle them? The one I keep running into is actually sound problems. I'm on an old Mac, and old Macs are really bad at streaming sound. So I keep running into that problem, and I just kind of have to roll with the punches and keep going. It's unfortunate, but there's just nothing I could do about it until I have the opportunity to crowdfund and upgrade my equipment. Gotta pay the bills before I can buy a new computer. What story problems do the players most often present you with, and how do you handle them? Problems are good in Chariot LARP. Problems are great, because they basically just argue about them and try to decide on things. One thing we grappled with in Alpha Run was what's our system of government look like? Will the captain get reelected? Will the provisional president be reelected? The problems were solvable in the story because it's a freeform game. How do you keep people excited about your game between events? We communicate on Discord, and and it's a lot easier to do for a digital LARP, I think, because we are a bunch of people that are always on the computer, right? And I ask questions on Facebook. So I ask things like, if you had to leave Earth tomorrow, what 3 things would you take with you? And then people can answer them from there. So I do have some engagement going on there. Are there any time management or production management tools you use? A lot of things. I keep the different runs separated in Discord. Again, that's a thing that Nick helps with so that I can communicate with players from each run easily. I use Jen to help with my scheduling. She does the emails to the players and the coordination like that. I communicate with my GM team and my admin team on Facebook. And I feel like I'm forgetting a big one. Calendly. That's the other thing. Calendly. Calendly. When people want to book times with me for character creation or to talk about LARP stuff, bam, I give them the Calendly, they book a time, and I call them. That's helped a lot. How do you handle real-world money transactions for your LARP? I hate handling money. I hate the financial aspect of LARPing. I hate it, I hate it, I hate it. But I need to eat, right? So I actually run everything through Eventbrite, and that money goes directly into my PayPal account and then directly to rent most of the time. That's where most of the money goes. How do you handle the stress when the game deadlines are approaching? I've learned to do like sound tests since I stream my game, and to do everything early. So I get ready a good half an hour earlier than I used to, and do all the testing and make sure somebody's available to help me with that stuff. That is a biggie. Do you run AGPs, after parties, debriefing events for your games? Why? Yes, for emotional safety reasons, and also because with the Alpha Run, we were still testing the game. After each session, we talked about it and made sure that we were all okay, and we have a communication system to check in with each other on Discord. So, absolutely, that's important. Does your game have insurance? No, we have some waivers that people need to sign to participate. It is an online game, so the risk involved is primarily like emotional and whatever content they might be exposed to. Everybody has to agree to abide by the rules of Twitch, since we broadcast over Twitch, and they have to acknowledge that could be adult content, and that we can't control what other players are going to say. And now the player management section. What logistical problems do the players most often present you with? For Chariot LARP, it's scheduling, because the game has a pretty demanding schedule. So we have to kind of work out when people can be there and when they can't. And I just roll with it on the fly. I've learned to just kind of write it in or in character, not know where they are, and that's happened pretty well. How do you handle situations in which a player has been made uncomfortable or triggered? We have some safety mechanics that we use in Chariot LARP. We have constant communication on Discord, so we try to prevent things, first of all, by getting consent for any kind of heavy emotional roleplay, even over the computer, where we plot out beforehand, ask, is this okay, stuff like that. So communication always is the best way to prevent it. It can still happen, and for that we have, again, the communication. We have the out-of-game symbol, which is kind of hard to verbalize on when you're in a chat room scenario. And then we use the look down, which has been used at a lot of Blockbuster LARPs recently, which is where I picked it up from. I learned it from New World Magiscola, but that basically is like this, which means the player and their character is not there, but you're not supposed to draw attention to it. So if we're doing a 4-hour role-playing session and somebody's got to get up and go to the bathroom, they can just, to make it like not a big deal, or if they're like really upset and they don't want to talk to anybody about it out of game, they can get up and excuse themselves without having to explain it. So that's also really important. How do you handle player conflict? I'm really fortunate in that I haven't had that happen yet, but my number one thing, if that did happen in Chariot LARP, would be I'd try mediation first, to see if there's anything we could do to smooth out any misunderstandings. And if the players, like if one of the players was outright like racist or homophobic or something, I would just boot them. Like, that's not a lot of my games. Most of the conflict I've seen results from at its root, results from something like racism. They're homophobic, they're transphobic, they're sexist. No room for that in my games. If you do that, you're booted, no refunds. So, most of the conflicts I've seen come out of that. How do you handle a player who is having serious character bleed? Talking. That's one of my toughest time things as a game designer. I'm trying to design a game, and I'm talking to people who need my support, not only from my last game, but from like the last 4 games that I played in, and they're also my emotional support, so I want to be there for them, but it takes a lot of time, and that's one of my biggest time management issues, is I want to be there and be supportive and help my friends, but game design is also my job, so I need to step away and work on my games. That's tough. Do I have a certified mental health professional on staff? Why or why not? I don't, because that is probably expensive. But I do ask people to volunteer in a counselor role so they can ease some of that in character. But out of character, like, I just try my best. And if somebody's having a serious problem, I tell them that they probably should be consulting a mental health professional. And I do think that's important, to be aware of. Mental health is really important. Bleed is the thing that happens, and that's really important to be aware of. And, there are some people who have mental illnesses, and it's not always easy to LARP when you have them. For me, LARP alleviates some any kind of issues that I have. It really helps me deal with stuff in a therapeutic way, even though it isn't therapy. Therapists have told me to LARP and to write LARPs because it does help me. But it's difficult. It's a really difficult thing, and it's something that everyone should be aware of. As far as accommodating players who have physical disabilities, that's actually one of the reasons that I created Chariot LARP. I have chronic illnesses, and Chariot LARP is designed so that you can play it from the comfort of your home, and you can play it over the computer. So you could even play Chariot LARP from bed. My bed is behind me. I work from my bed sometimes because I have rheumatoid arthritis, and I cannot work elsewhere. I am sitting at a desk in front of my bed. I have my captain's jacket right here behind me that I wear for Chariot LARP because at worst my commute when I'm running a game is from my bed to my chair. And that is because I have a chronic illness and I can't predict when I'm going to have bad days. So I have run Chariot LARP as Captain Emily when I've had bad days. And I've run it when I've had good days. And you can see the difference. I had a lot of swelling yesterday, so you can see right now my face is super swollen. I just lost 20 pounds, but my face is super swollen. That's because I have a chronic illness, right? And these things are not easy to deal with. So I wanted to make a LARP that was inexpensive and accessible to people who have chronic illnesses. That's really important to me. And mental illnesses as well. There are some days you can play, there are some days you can't. There are some days you can go out, there are some days you can't. And I really did my best to make Chariot accessible to them. Do you actively strive to establish trust between staff and players? Yeah, that's super important, and that starts with the character development process, having that one-on-one talk. Of course that's important, and I expect everyone on my staff to have the maturity to not abuse their power and to deal appropriately with players, and so far that's worked out really well. How do I establish that trust? Character creation. Welcome email, which is what Jen sends out, and then introducing all of our staff, and then character creation, where I talk with them one-on-one. The captain talks with the crew one-on-one and comes up with a good character for them that meets their needs, that makes them feel heard, that makes them feel understood. And so when a player says to me, I want to play a character who feels this or does this or has this as a big part of their history, and then I send them back a character and incorporate that, then they know I've listened to them because I've made a character that they hopefully like and that incorporates those things. What is your policy on reports of harassment? Those come directly to me, and if there is harassment, the player is booted. It's zero tolerance. I am a woman in geek culture. I originally founded the Geek Initiative as a content website for women in geek culture after I went into a comic book store as a 30-year-old woman and was told I should ask my big brother about Thor comics if I was really interested in them. And I'm like, I know everything about Thor. Every version of Thor. Try me, bro. Right? And that made me so upset that I felt like I couldn't even go into a comic book store to enjoy something I actually liked. I made a whole website. And I was like, fine, I'm just going to do my own thing. And that grew into a large editorial function, which I've actually passed off to another editor now so that I can focus on LARP development. And we're doing LARPs, we're publishing LARPs, and hopefully books in the future as well. It's become a big thing. So yeah, that's kind of part of the mission. So for the last section, we're talking about things beyond the now. What do you know now that you wish you had known when you started? It takes money to make money. I had no business starting Chariot LARP on $0. None. Like, I should have done the Kickstarter first. I have not done one, and I'm like, well, people have already bought tickets. Why are they going to invest in a Kickstarter when the reward is a ticket? Wish I would have done the Kickstarter first. I really do. Especially since I've been alpha testing this whole month. I could have been running a Kickstarter this whole month too. Because now I'm stuck with a crappy old computer. And I could have kickstarted, and even just knowing what I've made in ticket sales, if those had been Kickstarter rewards, those tickets, I could have tacked a little extra on there and I'd have a nice computer fund. So, that's the biggest thing I learned. With Blockbuster LARPs, takes money to make money. You cannot do a Kickstarter for a Blockbuster LARP if you don't have a location. You can't get a location unless you have insurance, which costs money. You can't get a location unless you can lock down the venue with a down payment. So any kind of in-person event you're doing, it takes money to make money. Where does that come from? I don't know. It takes a lot of privilege to make a LARP. Because if you don't have access to loans or money or rich parents, or if you're not pretty much doing this full time, which really, when you're doing a Blockbuster or a large online campaign game, or even like a monthly Boffer campaign game, it's like at least a full-time job, or at least a part-time job, usually a full-time job. So it takes a lot of privilege to actually run a LARP. It does. I mean, I pretty much have two jobs. I'm running LARPs and I'm editing. And the reason I'm not writing very much anymore, in terms of marketing and blogging, because it takes a lot out of me and I gotta save all that energy for my LARP stuff. So now I'm just editing because it's kind of like lower intensity for me. So I wish I'd also known, what else? Oh, stuff like health insurance is nice to have. I don't have it. I can't afford that. Even the affordable stuff, I have a chronic illness, $700 a month minimum to get me covered. Can't afford it. I wish I'd known actually well before I started that I should just take the leap and do it. But I also wish I'd done a Kickstarter first. What is your favorite part about staffing a game? Just watching what people do with it. I'm lucky because it's freeform, so I get to watch what people do, and it makes me really happy. Do I have a single most rewarding experience as game staff? I think when I was captaining Chariot LARP, and it was not this last session, but the one before, I saw that it was more freeform than I'd intended it to be, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is great, it's so collaborative, I love it, I love all my players. That was the moment that I was just in love with that style, and that's what they totally just went for. Fantastic. What would be the first thing to recommend someone do if they want to start their own LARP? Don't get too many staff people right away, just get a few core supporters, and you gotta have money to make money. If you don't have money, don't even think about it, unfortunately. And if I sound bitter about that, it's because it's true. Like, you need something to start off of, even if you're just doing it as a hobby. You need something. It's got to come from somewhere. So where are you getting that money? And my overall advice for someone starting their own LARP, if you're passionate about it, do it. Find a way to do it. I had no budget, so I made Chariot LARP digital. The other thing I did with no budget was I made a convention LARP. I made a salon LARP. You can make LARPs you play at home. You can do stuff like that. Design for your venue. Design for what space you have rather than your big epic scheme. That'll come eventually, and hopefully we'll all have the money for that eventually. Design for what you have available to you. If you have a backyard, design for your backyard. If you have access to a whole house, design for your house. Trust who you're working with. It's very expensive and time-consuming to do all the contracts that you need to do up front. So start with people you really trust And before you expand, before you get players, get all your legal paperwork in order. And if you're in the US, you want to get an LLC to protect yourself if you have any assets. So I would say, you know, just get those basics down and you're good to go. And even before you think of that, like, there's no harm in putting your idea on paper. Just sit down and start writing. The difference between someone who wants to be a writer and someone who is one is that a writer writes, and a writer, you know, keeps working at it, and an author or a designer actually finishes things. You know, that's the other big thing I've learned. I was building Chariot LARP as I was running it, and a lot of LARPs are launched on reputation, and I've seen from working on design teams for other games that are still very well organized and still greatly put together that you need a concept and some basic information. The details can come later. You'll have people paying you before you're writing things, which is really weird. But it actually works better that way, because then you can get input from them. So you don't have to have it 100% done. You have to have a proof of concept. You have to have some experience, but you don't have to have everything 100% done and planned out. Things will change. Venues could change. Ticket holders will change. So use what you have and just start writing, and it doesn't have to be perfect before you put it out there, which that has been hard for me to learn, but I've done it, right? Chariot LARP is always a work in progress. So I do welcome you to come aboard to Chariot LARP if you go to geekinitiative.com. Again, that's geekinitiative.com, and click on the LARP menu. It'll bring you right down to Chariot LARP, and you can also read about all of my safety and inclusion policies there, which go for all of the LARPs that I've written and will write. So please do that, and I look forward to hopefully seeing you at one of my games or at another game. Thank you so much.